I have very little chance of getting reelected president. That's too bad, because I really wanted Texas to be part of the nation. I'm going to be president, and I'm not interested in Texas. Actually, I'm going to be president, but I'm also not interested in Texas.
But the American people were interested in Texas. And in a final show of strength, President Tyler organized a third party, drawing enough attention to the issue to force the Democrats to nominate James Polk instead of Van Buren. A lot of Americans didn't know who Polk was outside of his home state of Tennessee, but he successfully linked Texas, which Southerners wanted, to Oregon, which Northerners wanted, and he promised fellow Democrats that he would only serve one term, winning over former Van Buren supporters. The Democrats and their so-called dark horse candidate won the election. At the time, Polk was the youngest president ever elected at age 49. Following Polk's election in 1844, the lame duck President Tyler had the required support to finally pass a joint resolution in Congress annexing Texas. Tyler signed the legislation days before leaving office, even though Polk's election is often credited with making it happen. However, Mexico had never even recognized Texas independence and threatened war if the U.S. annexed Texas. By the time Polk was inaugurated, diplomatic relations with Mexico had been severed.
Early in Polk's presidency, Brigham Young led thousands of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to the Salt Lake Valley to escape persecution.
Brethren, here we will build the temple of our God.
President Polk and others were concerned that Mexico might be planning to sell land to Britain to help them pay debts and separate their border from the U.S.
Mexico insisted the border was at the Nueces River, while Texas insisted it was the Rio Grande. As soon as the United States annexed Texas, President Polk sent a diplomat, John Slidell, to Mexico to negotiate three things: the border, debts owed by the Mexican government to U.S. citizens, and the purchase of California and New Mexico for as much as $50 million before they sold it to Britain. Of course, he hoped to weave some of these issues together, such as forgiving the debts if the border were settled at the Rio Grande. Slidell was sent back to Washington. But Polk couldn't live with no for an answer.
Mr. Fremont, I read your reports. I found them very interesting.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored. But I don't imagine you took time out of your schedule just to tell me that.
No, I didn't invite you here to talk about your past expeditions, but rather a future one.
Another trail to Oregon?
Not exactly. Officially, your mission will be to map out new territory and to discover the source of the Arkansas River. Unofficially, when you get to the Rocky Mountains, I want you to ride south into California. Once in California, I want you to talk to the local settlers. And, if you can, incite rebellion.
And you're sending me because you don't want it to appear to be a military operation.
Exactly.
I just need one thing from you. Kit Carson.
They arrived in Sutter's Fort, December 1845, which is Sacramento, the first settlement.
Now, did you know there's a Mexican fella in charge of California? Did you? That's because he doesn't come around.
When Fremont showed up in California in 1845, he found a populace that was deeply disenchanted with Mexican rule.
It doesn't matter if you bought the land, if you own the land, if you work the land. It doesn't even matter. If you have become a Mexican citizen, the Mexican government will take it away whenever they find that convenient. Who by right owns this land? Who by right owns it?
Fremont convinced Californian residents there was fighting to do.
Tired of waiting,
Polk sent the army into a disputed border
between Texas and Mexico, certain he can provoke Mexico to strike first.
How many men in the 5th Regiment?
We were attacked by Mexican troops in April of 1846 when they crossed the Rio Grande and killed 11 of my soldiers.
Polk went to Congress and he said, American blood has been shed on American soil. And despite our best efforts to prevent war with Mexico, they have attacked us. Now, this was a lie. In fact, the land was not American land.
On May 13, 1846, Congress approved the Mexican-American War, but America was deeply divided over the issue. Opponents called it Polk's War.
The Polk administration is taking advantage of Mexico while they are weak because of internal struggles. Tell me the exact spot where Americans were killed. I doubt it was in American territory.
Abolitionists opposed going to war with Mexico because they feared the expansion of slavery, but even some Southern slave owners opposed the war because they did not want people of color admitted to the Union.
Any new territory that we gain from Mexico after this war should only allow the white man to have citizenship. No Negroes should be allowed to have citizenship. That's right. And I propose that in this new territory, only white people will be allowed. Wherever there is Negro slavery, the white man will also suffer. Nice try. Slavery should remain legal. I just don't want Negroes to have citizenship. The Constitution allows slavery. I think we should just extend the 3630 line all the way to the Pacific Ocean. I suggest we let each state decide whether they want or don't want slavery. Popular sovereignty.
In California,
Fremont received a message from Polk. Your mission is no longer a secret. It's time to attack. Fremont prepared his volunteer troops. He wanted to attack Sonoma, Monterey, Los Angeles, and San Diego. More volunteers joined. They called themselves Los Osos. Sonoma wasn't well defended, and they conquered it quickly. The battle became known as the Bear Flag Revolt.
in just 2 months, with few casualties, Fremont and Carson
conquered most of California's coast. General Kearny, take your men from Texas to California to help Fremont fight Mexico. I have no idea if they have succeeded. Yes, sir. But before you do that, capture Santa Fe with your men. Sounds good?
by General Stephen Kearny. In early August 1846, Fremont and Carson
Reached Los Angeles.
after joining forces with U.S. Marines sent by Polk,
They seized the city.
the final Mexican stronghold in California.
It was at that point Fremont assumed that California was theirs.
Kit Carson, please travel 3,000 miles to tell President Polk that we have captured California, and then come on back. I'll do it. Easy. The United States won a lot of victories against Mexico, but the newspapers exaggerated and made it seem that there were never any problems for the USA.
An essay by the famous transcendentalist Henry David Thoreau persuaded many American citizens to stop paying their taxes in protest. Civil disobedience landed Thoreau in jail.
But the most direct route across the country cuts through one of the most hostile places in America, the Sonoran Desert. After traveling more than 1,000 miles, Carson's life
Was in danger. Fortunately, he ran into General Kearny's Army of the West. Kearny spent the last 6 months going to California.
If you have any extra supplies you could share, I'd appreciate it.
Where are you heading?
Washington. I have a message I need to relay.
Where from?
California.
Well, that's where we're headed. We ride out in the morning. What'd you say your name was?
Kit Carson.
You're Fremont's guide.
Instead of going to Washington, we need you to come with us as a guide.
You get some rest. We move out first thing in the morning.
Kearny sent Carson ahead to find the best route.
50 miles outside of San Diego.
Carson saw the Mexican army marching. Mexico quickly reclaimed some territory from Fremont.
How many of them were there? 100. Maybe more. Well mounted, too.
We have to attack. You with me?
Yes, sir.
Kearny completely underestimated the Mexican army. Carson got knocked unconscious for a moment. After he got up, he shot a lot of the opposing army. But the Mexican army was still winning.
Retreat! Retreat!
Kearny's force retreated. They were under siege by the Mexican army.
How many troops do you think are still out there?
More than we've got.
We need to sneak someone through enemy lines. Good word to San Diego.
See if there is anybody there to help us.
I'll do it.
He snuck past the Mexican soldiers.
Against all odds,
Kit Carson reached San Diego in one day.
Halt! Who goes there? Hold your fire! Wait, I'm an American. General Kearny sent me. The Mexican army has his entire battalion surrounded. What? About 35 miles back across the desert.
Kit Carson returned with 200 soldiers to aid Kearny's battalion. The Mexican army scattered when they saw the troops coming. Carson found out that Kearny survived.
We'll make straight for San Diego, resupply, then on to Los Angeles.
You think we can take it?
We'll see.
Carson didn't know if Fremont was still alive. Fremont was near Monterey, California. More than 400 men joined him. They headed south toward Los Angeles.
at the same time, Kearny and Carson planned their own route north.
Kearny's army arrived first. Kearny's and Fremont's forces surrounded the Mexican troops. The Mexican army surrendered after a few hours. They raised the U.S. flag over Los Angeles.
And Polk decided it was time for the war to end. Unfortunately, Mexicans had no interest in ending the war. They were angry and they refused to come to terms.
I oversaw the landing of our troops at the port of Veracruz in March of 1847. We promptly attacked the city, which surrendered shortly thereafter on March 29th.
Scott's next move was to make a long and difficult journey to Mexico City. Many predicted Scott's demise because he was cut off from most supplies and was significantly outnumbered by the Mexican troops.
We were low on supplies, which made our march very difficult. We then confronted Santa Anna at the Battle of Cerro Gordo, about 60 miles from Veracruz. We destroyed the enemy, and they retreated quickly to Mexico City.
I laid siege to Mexico City in September 1847 at Chapultepec Castle. We experienced bloody hand-to-hand fighting to end the organized Mexican resistance.
He is just a child, but a hero. Stop. Brave boy.
Although President Polk had officially recalled his diplomat from Mexico City, Nicholas Trist proceeded with negotiations, and since the terms were favorable, Polk sent the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo to the Senate for ratification. The main provision of the treaty was America's right to buy about half of Mexico's land, the territories of California and New Mexico, for $15 million. This land has come to be known as the Mexican Cession. Additionally, the U.S. would assume $3.25 million in debts owed to U.S. citizens in exchange for setting the Texas border at the Rio Grande. The Senate approved the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on March 10, 1848, and though the Wilmot Proviso never passed both houses, the controversy over slavery in the Mexican Cession persisted, dominating congressional attention until after the Civil War.
A public relations campaign endorsed the slogan, 54-40 or fight, suggesting that America go to war to get all of the Oregon Territory. But Polk didn't really want war with Mexico and Great Britain at the same time, so he diplomatically secured the modern U.S.-Canadian border at the 49th parallel in 1846. It wasn't all Oregon, but he didn't have to fight for it or pay for it. The growing abolitionist movement was absolutely convinced that President Polk and the so-called slave power were plotting to take over the nation. To be fair, he did own slaves his entire life, but just like George Washington, he had indicated in his will that all of his slaves be freed upon his wife's death. In addition to territorial expansion, President Polk was also successful at achieving several of his financial goals for the nation. He changed the banking system again and lowered taxes with the Walker Tariff. His goal was revenue only and not protection for manufacturing, which he felt was an unnecessary federal intrusion into the economy. Of course, Northern industrialists felt he was only protecting the South and slave power at their expense. Then, he vetoed an internal improvement bill because it was what we would call today a pork bill. Federal money had been designated to improve small ports that had no strategic value at the federal level. Polk claimed that if he allowed this to happen, congressmen would start competing for favors from the federal government. James Polk also created the cabinet-level Department of the Interior, the first new executive department since 1792. One of Polk's few failed goals was the acquisition of Cuba in 1848. He attempted to purchase the nearby island for the modern equivalent of $2.69 billion. In spite of the generous offer, Spain rejected it, and Polk dropped the issue. After all, he'd already expanded the U.S. landmass by a third in just 3 years. President Polk also failed to enjoy retirement with his wife that he looked forward to. His ambitious one-term presidency wore him out. He died a few months after leaving office.